Hi guys, my name is Sharice Marshall, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the transition and importance of language among the Tlingit people. So to start off, I'd like to give you a brief introduction and history of the Southeast Alaskan culture, the Tlingit, and I'd also kind of like to tell you a bit about why I actually chose this paper. So in my paper, I discussed the history of assimilation and early language among the Tlingit people, kind of what's going on now in terms of language revival and where we hope to be in a few years with this language revival, and the overall importance of language within the culture. So the Tlingit people are from Southeast Alaska. There are two other native groups that are located in the same area. They are the Tsimshian and Haida cultures. And even though they are very close in proximity to each other, each individual culture has their very own unique set of language and dialect, and they really are very distinct from each other. So, in the early years of assimilation to Russian culture, Catholicism was introduced to the Tlingit people, and it was kind of breaking up their normal routine and traditions of spirituality and connection with the earth and shamanism, and introducing these whole new views to Catholicism and or Christianity of what we know today. And primarily the people coming over were speaking English and Russian language. So they opened up these boarding schools and introduced missionaries who were there to ensure that the natives at the time were learning English as opposed to continuing their native language of Tlingit. So I'd like to read you a little piece from Caskey Russell's article, Language, Violence, and Indian Miseducation. And it kind of is a recount from somebody who heard about this story of a missionary. So the quote is, "A Quaker missionary in Douglas, Alaska, had a unique way of dealing with the Tlingit students he overheard speaking their language. When the missionary, quote, heard an Indian student speaking Tlingit, he would soak a sponge with hot peppers and bitter-tasting resin, and then rinse the verboten vocabulary from the offender's mouth." So the Tlingits were punished by missionaries whenever they spoke their native language instead of English. And in this article, he describes more than just one way of really brutal punishment. And he also describes a much deeper level of punishment, which was humiliation and embarrassment among the Tlingit people because they could not be who they were, even though it was just a language, I guess you could say. Language meant more and means more than just the spoken vocabulary, which leads me to my next section, which is language loss is the loss of a culture. So, I mean, really, what happens when a language dies? There are traditions that are lost. Stories or spoken history is lost. There are negative effects on elders. I was fortunate enough to attend this Elders in Training Summit that was put on here in Fairbanks that had many different elders from the surrounding villages and towns of Alaska. And one of the primary concerns that they actually talked about was the disinterest, the youth being disinterested in their own cultures and feeling as though it wasn't important to them to learn where they came from, and let alone learn the importance of their language, which I think was really the primary concern, because it means so much more to be able to speak your language. Like these elders who are continuously trying to use their languages, it is dying away and really is kind of very sad. Anyways, another kind of negative part about losing a language is you're not just losing words, but you're losing the cultural identity as a whole. So, and this influences generational grief and trauma that goes on years and years and years after the initial oppression of this language. And I'd like to actually read you a quote from Lance Twitchell, who is an assistant professor of Alaskan Native Language at UAS, which is the Southeast campus. And this is from an article online that I found on ktoo.org, and it's called Preventing Language Loss, a 3-step process. So, Lance says, "Our grandparents experienced great violence for our language. Our parents experienced great neglect with our language. And we are trying to look at all those things so that our children and grandchildren will just speak." So really the main concern is just speaking their language, just getting out who they are and expressing everything from ancestry to who they are currently to who they want to become, this strong nation of people who have been oppressed for so many years. So just a few statistics that I included within my paper, and these are about all of the languages as a whole. I know I did a lot more focus on the Tlingit culture actually in my paper, but I feel that with this presentation I'd like to touch on just more than the Tlingit people, because this is a nationwide issue of language loss. It doesn't just affect the indigenous people of Southeast Alaska or of the interior or of Canada or the Southeast United States. It affects all languages as a whole. Anyway, so these facts come from an article published in 1995. So keeping that in mind, they might be a little different now, but even so, it's still fairly surprising to know these things about this language, or these languages within Alaska. So there are 20 total Alaska Native languages. Siberian Yupik and Central Yupik are the only two being learned the traditional way, which is parents teaching the children, speaking to them, and the children learning that way. So Iyak has one speaker left in her 70s, and again, this was actually written in 1995, so either there are no people left speaking this language, or if she was able to pass it on to people, it's probably not going to be as strong of a language or solid in these people's minds, or there's probably not very many who actually do speak it now. Tsimshian and Haida, which are the other two Southeast Alaska cultures, there are no speakers in Alaska younger than 60 years old. And there are 11 languages that have no speakers younger than 40, and they are Aleut, Alutiiq, Tlingit, and 7 of the 11 Athabaskan languages. There are 3 Athabaskan languages that may still be spoken among younger adults, 20 to 30 years of age, and I'm pretty sure that there are different programs implemented in elementary, grade school education, as well as higher education, such as college programs. I know throughout the UA campuses there are Tlingit languages available, Alaska Native Studies. There's a lot of different language courses that are available for students to take to kind of revive those languages that are being lost among cultures. So, speaking of language revival, I'd like to take this moment to actually talk about House Bill 216, which recognizes the 20 native languages as the official languages of Alaska. And I could read the entire wording of House Bill 216, but there are a lot of languages in here that I'm not quite sure I know how to pronounce. But I really suggest and strongly urge, if you guys haven't paid any attention to this bill, look up on the legislative webpage the process and progress that it's made, and it truly is phenomenal. So it passed through the 28th state legislative session with unanimous votes in both the House and Senate, and it is currently now awaiting transmittal to the governor for his signature to be passed into law. And this is incredibly significant because, one, there's only one other state, which is Hawaii, that has actually recognized a language as the state's language other than English. And that's not to say that recognizing these languages is going to kind of negate English or put it on kind of a second back burner. No signs will be switched over from English to different native languages, but it will really highlight and revive the language of the Alaska Native people. And also, as I spoke before, language is not just important in terms of spoken words and stories, but it's also really the keystone for culture. And so with recognizing these cultures in Alaska as the official languages of the state, I'm sure there will be more education programs, more events being held to emphasize the importance of language and culture among the state. I actually read an article that was in response to the current passing of this bill, and I feel that somebody put this really elegantly. So they said that this vote recognizes the past, encourages the present, and secures the future of the earliest Alaska languages. So really, you know, it's taking away those layers of generational grief and trauma and re-emphasizing the importance of this culture now and also preserving it for future generations to learn some of the earliest and most important material to these cultures in Alaska. Um, so, that being said, thank you guys for listening. Again, this paper that I wrote was more specifically surrounded the Tlingit culture, but I really wanted to take this time to kind of explore all of the avenues of language importance among the cultures of Alaska, because this class is about Alaska Native Studies, and I feel it's incredibly important to acknowledge all of the cultures, especially with the most recent passing of this bill. So, that being said, I'd like to end this with a couple different little quotes. So this one is from Lance Twitchell, who is that assistant professor at UAS, and he says, "Our language is everything. It's the air we breathe. It's the blood that flows through our veins." And I would just like to tell you guys, thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this resonates with you and carries on past this presentation. And on that note, I'm also going to play, I found this wonderful website that actually had little tidbits of Tlingit phrases, so I'd like to play a quote for ya.
Yagao owe ha it ko ha. It is time for our turn, or the time has now come upon us.
And it really is the time for these cultures to re-embrace themselves and speak among everybody and just enforce the importance of culture among everybody. So, in Tlingit, Gunash Chish, and thank you for listening.